Greetings and welcome to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's webinar series. My name is John Ruzek with the Alumni Association. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a great webinar coming up. Whether you're in business, nonprofit, government, in the workplace, managing people can be hard. And so we're going to have some tips later on today from our featured presenter. But before we get started, just a few things to go over. Today's webinar is part of an ongoing free series being offered by the Alumni Association, where we have conversations with experts about career, life, and learning topics. Initiatives like this webinar series are made possible in part by our Alumni Association members. So thank you. If you are a member, you help create powerful opportunities and ignite success for current students and more than 485,000 alumni around the world. And if you'd like to check out our work, you can visit us at umnalumni.org/membership. In the month of September, we have our members only maroon t-shirt for sale, and designed by our own Brianne Christian, one of our student designers. And if that's something of interest, just visit umnalumni.org/maroon shirt. And that's supporting initiatives like our free Maroon and Gold network, which is a career resource for both alumni and students, where you can find alumni and friends of the university who are willing to share career and industry advice with others. So a lot of great ways to make informational interview connections or learn about industry. And if that's something of interest, just visit umnalumni.org/maroon and gold. Some great webinars coming up. In October 8th, we have a midterm election update with a couple political science faculty from the College of Liberal Arts. October 11th, Elizabeth Craig will be talking about making a career change. And on October 25th, Chad Ellsworth will be talking about foes, fear, and failures, confronting the 3 F's to become your best. Last but not least, thank you to our partner and webinar supporting sponsor, Liberty Mutual Insurance. And just some last housekeeping items on the technical side. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel, and dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience difficulties while listening via your computer speakers, this can sometimes be caused by having multiple programs open on your computer, or perhaps listening via a wireless signal. So if you're on wireless, perhaps move to more of a Ethernet connection. And there will be time during a presentation today where you can ask questions, and you can do that by typing your questions in the question pane on your GoToWebinar control panel. And we'll be watching it along the way, and so we definitely want to hear from you. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, alumna Kate Bischoff. She is a self-described overly enthusiastic, sarcastic, and opinionated management side employment attorney and SHRM-SCP-certified HR pro. Kate works closely with management and HR personnel to improve organizations and make it easier to recruit and retain talent through easy-to-understand policies, easy-to-use technology, and easy-to-explain compliance initiatives. She has been recognized by the New York Times, CNN.com, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, National Public Radio, and other journalistic sources as a leading authority on harassment, technology in the workplace, and employment law. And Kate earned her Bachelor of Arts from the University of Minnesota in 1998. And it is so great to welcome Kate Bischoff. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for having me. I'm very excited about this topic. I, like most HR folks, spend a lot of time talking about managers, both our love of them and how important they are, and also the, oh my God, I can't believe what this manager just did. So today's presentation is a little bit of a tough love letter to new managers, kind of giving them an overview of what we wish you knew as a new manager and what we want you to look for when there may be problems that arise in the workplace. So let's get started. As John mentioned, I am an employment attorney. I suffer from law degree, but I hope that means you don't hold that against me. I got my HR street cred working for the U.S. Department of State as the HR officer for ConGen Jerusalem and U.S. Embassy Zambia, where I got to really stick my feet in the whole HR gamut. So as a lawyer, I was thinking I was dealing with all of HR issues, but when you really get into HR, you see all the multitudes of fires that you're putting out and all the strategery you need to use to move forward. So with that experience, I got all the fancy letters, and I started my own business about 2 years ago doing exactly this. About a third of my practice is helping organizations figure out what's going wrong, whether it's a harassment, there is bad management, an employee's done something wrong. I help them figure out what's happening. Another third of my practice is helping them come up with new policies, where we're being proactive in the policies and what we ask employees to do, but also what they can expect from us, and trying to be as positive as we can and really set a tone for a positive workplace. And then that last third of my business is doing tons and tons of trainings, usually on things like policy related, mostly these days, it's sexual harassment work, but a lot of getting managers and employees up to speed on what those policies mean and how we actually want them to use it. So putting them into some real life scenarios. As an adjunct professor at Mitchell and Hamlin School of Law, I also teach compliance. So I come to compliance in HR with this idea that we're not always going to say no. HR has a reputation for when we are approached with a problem, our immediately answer is going to be, no, you can't fire this person, or no, you can't do that for this and so laws. And I believe that we don't always mean no. We mean that we have constraints about what you want to do, but we can get to the goal that you're looking for. So my clients all usually hear me say yes, and can we do a severance agreement with that term? Or yes, and can we think about changing that model just a little bit? So with that philosophy in mind, let's talk about some managers. So we're going to cover today what being a manager means, what the expectations for you are, your responsibilities, both from what the law makes your responsibilities, but a little bit also of what an employer is going to require you to do. I'll go through my 2 questions that I ask every new manager to seriously consider using when dealing with people problems. And then we'll go through some scenarios that are really difficult to parse through. And you'll see that I use a lot of these scenarios when I'm training new managers. And these scenarios highlight the problem areas that might come up in your workplace. And so I'm hoping just to line the back of your brains with some bells so that in case you hear of a similar situation, a bell goes off and you know, oh, I need to talk to somebody about that particular scenario. Okay, so let's get started. Being a manager means you make more money, right? It means you get to buy a new car. It may mean that you get to wear a fancy suit or that you have to wear a new suit. But being a manager was way more than just a title and a raise. Managers have manage in the title of their new position, which means we actually have to manage people when we are a manager. And this is often lost on employers. First, we go, who is best at making these widgets? We should make that widget maker the widget manager. And then we throw that person into the ocean of managing widgets, and they don't have the skills of how to deal with people necessarily. And so we're concerned about, making sure they're still making all the widgets and managing people at the same time, which means that managing people usually falls down the list of priorities. However, the law says you are the company. If you can sign a contract, sign a purchase agreement, sign a purchase order, or make hiring and firing decisions, you act as the organization. So you have a great deal amount of more responsibilities than you might think you have. And so that means we should, as employers, give you more tools to help you do a better job and give you the time and the resources to actually manage. Because if you're going to bind the company, we want to make sure that you're making wise decisions as we go through. So for me, managing means removing roadblocks for employees and then advocating for what those employees need. And we're going to go through a scenario that kind of highlights this in a minute, but I want to spend some time talking about what this means. If you're a manager and you have an employee who is struggling, It is our job to figure out why is that employee struggling. Is the employee struggling because they're having difficulty working with another group, whether it's somebody else who's managing that group? Can we step in and help remove that roadblock so things are easier? Or is the struggle because of something that is happening in their life that's making it more difficult, which may mean that they're entitled to things like family medical leave? Is there a problem with performance because they don't know what they're doing, and that maybe more training or mentorship might be necessary? And so I look at advocating for what employees need as they need to be able to do their job and to do their job. So if there's something that's prohibiting them from doing their job, we as managers should go seek out what is the concern or the issue that's holding our employees back. And you see this a lot in institutional or industrial psychology, where we're asking employees to trust us and then we should trust them. And so the overarching philosophy these days is that we should let employees do what they need. We should give them the freedom to go out and actually do their job. And this is in part why we see a movement towards organizations with less hierarchy, or that they're a flatter organization, because employees have the skills to go do what they need. Well, even in those organizations, there's still someone who has the last laugh, or the buck stops with them. And so for managers, we need to understand that for most of our employees, even if we're in middle management or low-level management, the buck stops with us when they have a concern. And so we need to be able to address the concern, or at least know who is our friend, mostly HR, to help us address that particular issue. So let's do our first scenario that highlights this kind of philosophy for you. Julie is having difficulty with a customer. The customer has paid for his or her order through an ACH deposit, but the accounts receivable has yet to credit the purchase because it has yet to actually acknowledge the payment. The customer wants to make another purchase, but can't because of how the accounts receivable process works. So Julie's frustrated. She's got another sale. She really wants to get that sale in because maybe it's the end of the month and this will mean she bonuses or gets a company t-shirt, but she really wants to get the sales in, and there's a problem within accounts. So what are you going to do as her manager? Well, the easy thing here is to, 1, listen to Julie, and 2, go to accounts receivable, or go to accounts receivable manager to address the concern, saying, hey, is there a way that we can move this order or recognize the payment out of sequence, or even move this faster so that we can get this other order in, because the customer wants it in, Julie needs it in, and this will all make us look good because we're all advancing the company, we're making more sales. So this is that first step in removing a roadblock. The roadblock here is the accounts receivable process. We, as the manager, can remove it by going to accounts receivable and asking for assistance, or going to the accounts receivable manager and asking that person to help remove the roadblock. So this is a relatively common problem. We see this in nearly every organization, not necessarily the ACH payment, but we see where there can be friction between different departments, and we as managers then have to go help negotiate those differences through in the advance of the organization. Okay, so let's say you've gone to the accounts manager or accounts receivable manager, and the accounts receivable manager is upset that this complaint came to them, and that person goes to the CFO, and the CFO is also really upset that this complaint came to them, and that you should never have been involved in the accounts receivable process. And he has let his frustration be known to the CEO and others. And your boss comes to you with concern about the CFO's anger, because if the CFO is angry, nobody's happy. It's kind of like the CEO. CFO controls the purse strings. You want those people to be happy. Well, in this situation, we're going to have to advocate for Julie. We're going to have to say, you know what, there was a problem processing this order. We really needed to get processed. Julie was doing the right steps, but there was a problem with accounts receivable not recognizing the situation, and we fixed it so that we could get the order in. This does 2 things. You're standing up for Julie, who is now going to believe that she can trust you. This is part of that advocacy that builds trust. And so Julie knows that she can come to you with problems because you have her back. For the CFO and your own manager, it shows that you have a solid reasoning about what you need to do and you can manage up. This is advocating for Julie and managing up because you're setting out what the expectations were, what the problem was, and how you dealt with the problem, assuming you were respectful and responsible. I'm going to assume that all of you are respectful and responsible because you're listening to this webinar, first of all. So that's that first scenario. We identified a roadblock, we removed the roadblock, and then we advocated on behalf of Julie. If managers had the time to do these kinds of things every day, whether they were piddly or they were significant, we would have organizations run much better. But for a lot of organizations, we don't have the time or the resources to give managers that time to do these kinds of things. So let's move on a little bit to what the expectations organizations have for you. So if you're a manager, we expect that you're going to do the following. You are going to select good people. You are going to set and know the expectations of each one of your people. You're going to adequately monitor their performance. You're actually going to do some what we in the HR biz calls performance management. Then we're going to deal with discipline issues. So if Julie has been late 20 times, we're going to deal with Julie's tardiness. And then this is the one that is the most frustrating for managers. You're set to inspire employees, which is a really hard expectation. I don't know of anybody who's like, I'm going to go inspire people today. Well, if that's you, we need to have a little bit of a self-help book to begin with and maybe a little humility. However, we expect managers to inspire employees to get their work done and then actually terminate the bad employees. Now, as a University of Minnesota alumni, we have no bad people. We only have not so great people because we are Minnesota nice. However, we do expect managers to take the steps necessary to remove people when they shouldn't be with us anymore. So these are generally the expectations that an organization places on a new manager. And that's no little amount. This is pretty significant. Even if you have just one employee doing all of these things well, it can be really difficult. If you manage that for 20, 30, 50 employees, it gets even more difficult. So in addition to those regular expectations, we make you do a lot of other things. We make sure that you have to know what company policies are and that you're going to police them. You're going to sign off on time cards, expense reports, vacation and PTO requests. You're going to schedule your people accordingly, and you have mountains of other paperwork. Now, not using the big C compliance, which means compliance with actual laws. These are little C compliance. These are little C compliance. You're monitoring those policies. You're getting all the paperwork in on time. And this can be a large chunk of the work a manager does. Luckily, in the next couple of years, I said probably by the end of 5 years, most organizations are going to be able to automate almost all of these things to give managers the time and the resources to actually spend time managing. But a lot of these things still happen today. And we understand that we expect you to be able to go through and find problems in time cards, find problems in PTO requests and all of that. But we also expect that you're going to do all the inspiry things as well. So it can be difficult. I get it, but there's a lot of time management built into these kinds of things. So you have your expectations that the company's going to place, and then you've got these expectations that the law requires you to do. And I'm giving you just a sample of the major laws that might be effective for you. The first one is Title VII, which means discrimination and harassment. This is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as amended by 1991 amendments. That's just the long legally title if there happens to be any other lawyers out there. But discrimination and harassment has certainly taken the spotlight for managers these days, and you definitely have a role to play in those. You also have a role to play in knowing when and if the Family and Medical Leave Act or the Americans with Disabilities Act would apply to a particular employee. You will also be required to know when overtime is required and what classification employee has under the FLSA with assistance from HR, but you will need to know who gets overtime and who doesn't. You're also expected not to interfere with employees' rights to complain or even praise their terms and conditions of employment, which is essentially the National Labor Relations Act. There's lots more provisions in the act, but that is mostly it. If you hear employees complain about the time they have to do or their workloads or even yourself, you can't quash those kinds of conversations, even if you're in a non-union setting. And then there's workers' compensation and OSHA laws that require you to report when there are worker injuries. And then each state and each locality these days has its own laws that you might need to know just a little bit about. Primarily, these laws exist so that people like me can pay our mortgages and feed our children. However, they exist in a way that you as a manager don't need to know all of the ins and outs of these. Your organization is required to know that. And for most organizations, that falls to human resources to be aware and be tracking these compliance issues. But as a manager, know that we in HR are here to help you and partner with you. So if you have issues, you come to us so that we can see if these laws actually apply. Okay. So let's get into those expectations one by one. The first is selecting good people. If you're in a position to hire and fire people, we want you to select good people for the job. First, that means you need to know the job for what you're hiring for. These days, you might not know exactly how to make the widget, but you're going to be responsible for knowing how the person makes the widget from a positional standpoint. You don't need to know what screw goes where, but you need to know the skills and requirements for that actual position. And typically we find these in job descriptions. When I'm giving a presentation to a group of HR people, I often ask them, so how many of you have updated your job descriptions in the last year? Which is the baseline requirement that most employment lawyers want. We want you to look at it yearly. And maybe a third raise their hand. So we understand that for both HR and managers, this is a relatively low priority that you have, is to update those job descriptions. But we do want you to know the job, and at the very least be able to describe what the quote unquote essential functions of that job is. So does it have does it require technical skills? Does it require interpersonal skills? What kind of educational requirements are going to be in there? That's what knowing the job means. So when you're going to be selecting someone for the job, either through the first round of resume reviews or in doing actual interviewing, we're going to require you to ask about the job. Now, I'm going to tell you a quick little story. In one of my positions when I was in HR, I had a manager ask a candidate, well, what are your hobbies? Now, the manager was asking, what are your hobbies, in hopes that the person, who happened to be 6'4", played basketball because he was looking for more people for his basketball team, and also looking for a person for the job. So he believed that this was job related, even though I knew it was not. And so I've been in the position, as have many HR people, to say, you don't get to ask that question. So we're going to ask you to really ask about the job. Also, the other bonus about asking about the job is that you're not going to ask for information that may be about someone's race, color, creed, age, national origin, disability, their marital status, their family status, their veteran status, their status with regard to public assistance, or any of the other protected classes that might exist in your locality. So if you're asking about the individual's ability to do the job and the situations about the job, then those are the good questions we want you to ask. I get to do an interviewing training every couple of years for a group of recruiters, and it's one of my favorite because they are always like, well, we need to know about the cultural fit and whether or not this individual will fit into the culture of the organization. And then I want to take that recruiter out back behind the auditorium and take them hard with a little bit of a whip, going, cultural fit isn't necessarily the best way to hire. Because cultural fit means you're going to hire someone who is the same, who will fit into the conversations. If I had a group of women in accounting and I was looking at a male candidate and a comment was, I don't want a fox in the hen house, That may be a culture fit thing. However, differences are good. We want differences in our organization. It's the right thing to do. And we know that when we have individuals who have different life experiences, have come from different countries, or have other experiences that could add to us, we make better decisions. And so this idea that we're looking for culture fit is, I'm going to say, is hogwash. So hence the picture of my pigs. Okay. The next requirement we set on you is setting expectations. Each job has different expectations, and part of knowing the job and preparing that job description is to figure out what the expectations are for that individual job. We want to make sure that your people know those expectations and that they understand them. There's this old saying out there that it takes a person 7 times to actually hear something and digest and understand it. So if the only place you're setting expectations is in the job description, your people don't necessarily know what those expectations are. So we ask you as a manager to go through what those expectations are and then to explain those to your employees. Those expectations can follow things like the SMART goals, where they are time sensitive, they are relevant, they all apply to the job, all of those things. But employees need to understand what their expectations is and how they can measure themselves against those expectations. From a Gallup poll, we found that when an employee doesn't understand the expectations that are set for them, this is the #1 reason why they are unhappy in their job, or for the HR speak out there, why they have low employee engagement. So it may seem like Management 101 that you should set expectations and your employees should know them. It bears repeating that you guys all need to be good at doing this for them. So now that we set expectations, we got to deal with people problems. Now, this slide is going to be very difficult for some of you. You got to deal with people problems, okay? It is very easy to try to avoid conflict as a manager and say when there's interpersonal conflict in our teams, or somebody is not doing as well as we want, and we really would just hoping and praying that things will get better is not always the best track for managers. In fact, I would say it's almost never the right track for managers. Your obligation is to make sure that we're making the right amount of widgets and they're good quality widgets. And when there's interpersonal conflict, or if there's a problem with someone's performance, or there's a problem with someone misbehaving or engaging in other kinds of misconduct, that hampers our ability to be the best we can. So we gotta deal with people problems. We can't be an ostrich and just stick our heads in the sand and hope that everything's gonna be okay. More often than not, we're gonna have to step in and actually deal with the problem. And when we get to the 2 questions, a lot of the 2 questions will help you with dealing with those problems. So part of people problems comes down to performance or misconduct, otherwise known as performance management and discipline. And I have a pretty strong feeling about which one is which. And for a lot of my clients, we spend some time talking about what is a performance issue versus what is a discipline issue. And so I separate these out into 2 different categories. Performance is having problems actually doing the job. Usually the employee is trying their best, or at least they're not trying to be bad. There's a lack of intent to actually cause the problem, and usually additional training can solve this problem for us. Usually it's a lack of knowing the right tools to use, knowing how to deal with a particular customer or problem. It's usually something that just some more supervision, some more mentoring can actually solve. And then there's misconduct. Misconduct actually is not wanting to do the job. It's not willing to get the job done. It's willful action or repeated neglect. And you know that consequences exist. It is difficult to try to train someone to not engage in misconduct, okay? I can't train you on how to set an alarm clock. I can't train you to know how to get to work on time. I can't train you not to lie to me, okay? Insubordination, tardiness, attendance, those are some of the most prevalent and easily described misconduct issues. In those situations, we can't train to solve away those problems. Another one that falls in the category of misconduct most often is an attitude issue, where we've got a negative Nelly who just doesn't want to do the job, thinks the job is beneath her. That is a misconduct issue. That isn't a performance issue. And so we'll go through a couple of samples. First, Anna fails to show up to an event on time. This is her third tardy. The event is work related, and because it's a tardy, we can't necessarily train her to get to work on time. However, we can discipline her for this. So this is a discipline issue. The next, Abed starts putting things together upside down. While it doesn't appear to be wrong initially, when the components are all together, there are serious implications in the product that we're making. This is something that if we just went and talked to Abed, or we gave him assistance by having another employee sit next to him for a little while, we can train this to be better. This is a performance issue. While something like this is a relatively easy fix in many cases, I'm not saying that it's not in every case, but in many cases, this is a one-time fix where we might not need to use what is formally known as a performance improvement plan or a PIP. So this is something that's performance related, and some additional assistance to Abed can solve. Next, Juliana has dropped a case of glass. This is her fourth drop, resulting in losses of over 400. This, again, is a performance issue, more than likely, because she doesn't know how to carry it. Is there a different tool? Can we use one of those lifts, or like the manual forklift, something like that? See, I'm not on a manufacturing floor very often, so give me some space here. But this is something that we can train her to do better. Now, if it appears that this is malintent, that she is going around and sabotaging us, while Sabotage is an excellent Beastie Boys album, it's not something that we can deal with on a performance basis. So knowing a little bit about her motivation will be important here. And that gets us back to those two questions we'll talk about soon. And last, we suspect that Mo is stealing spoons. When somebody is stealing from us, this is not a performance issue. It doesn't belong in a performance improvement plan. And stealing is one of those things where we probably can fire them almost immediately. Jurors don't like stealers, and so I feel pretty confident standing in front of a jury and saying, we let Mo go because he was stealing stuff. Now, if he's stealing the swing line stapler, that's a little different than stealing our company car, but in each situation, there might be an appropriate level of discipline and not a performance improvement plan that goes along with it. And finally, Amanda has been rude to customers on more than one occasion. Rudeness is evidenced by intent to be rude, and that intent was going to mean a discipline issue and not a performance issue. Okay, so performance means, particularly when we need to do performance management, it's either things are going really, really well or things are going not so great. Again, my Minnesota niceness is showing through. I'll try to keep my Badger jokes to a minimum. So if an employee is not meeting expectations, here is what I would expect a manager to do. One, review what the expectations are with the employee. You need to be doing XYZ things, and we're not doing it right now. Here is how we're not doing that and how we expect you to actually meet those expectations. Then explain a little bit about what I, as a manager, am going to do to help the situation. And then praise and monitor progress. Often in performance improvement plans, we give an employee amount of time to improve, and we set up weekly meetings with them to check in on how things are going. Those are excellent ways to monitor performance. When somebody is actually meeting the expectations, that is fantastic. But we actually have to tell the employee that that's fantastic. Recognition is a key component for an employee being satisfied with their job. And if they don't ever get that recognition, well, then the employee is probably not satisfied with their job and may be looking for that recognition elsewhere, which may be your competitor. So to the extent that we can recognize and reward where we can. Now, we don't always have an ability to give a bonus, but if we do, or even giving the company t-shirt, putting someone up as the employee of the month, or, you know, praising people in public, that's kind of reward that people are looking for. This isn't just something that we tie to the millennial or Gen Z generations individually, but it's kind of universal. If I am a Gen Xer, I like to get recognition. So, to the extent that you can recognize and reward, let's try it. Okay, so when I was in 4th grade, there was this book that came out that's called All I Ever Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And Mr. Fulgham's book is still one of my favorite management books of all time, because this book says we should do the following things. We should say please and thank you. We should stand in a line when the line is expected of us. And for most of my problems these days, or trainings these days surrounding sexual harassment, we should keep our hands to ourselves. And so Mr. Fulgham's book is still a place where I cite quite a bit. Here, discipline really doesn't require us to set expectations. If you have a discipline policy that has 37 bullet points about what someone can and cannot do, well, I promise you employees are very innovative and creative and are going to find a 37th, 38th, and 39th thing that is shared with them, or that will come up with them, and then you don't have it on your list, and so your list grows. I generally recommend that employers have a discipline policy that says something like the following, which I steal wholeheartedly and give credit to Neiman Marcus, which is use good judgment at all times. That's what we're going to expect you to do. And so good judgment means I'm not going to steal the car. I'm not going to lie to my manager. I'm not going to engage in the conduct that could otherwise get me in trouble. For a manager, when discipline or misconduct happens, you need to timely address this. We want you to work with HR folks so that consistency can be made. And we understand that sometimes you want to keep somebody because you still need them to do the 30% of the job that they're doing well. But I promise you, everyone is replaceable, even in places like Minnesota, where we have an unemployment rate of under 3%. So we get that it can be very difficult, but keeping someone around who has engaged in misconduct only hurts employee morale, particularly the employees who are seeing this employee engage in misconduct and not getting caught for it, or at least not being called out for it. So to the extent that you see misconduct happening, please, please, please address it as soon as you possibly can. So we've got a scenario here. Jamal works as an assistant to a sales consultant. Over the past 6 months, he's been making several mistakes each week, losing phone numbers, dropping calls, not completing research in a timely manner. And then last week, we lost a client because of him. Jamal's failure to give a message to the sales consultant resulted in that client leaving us. If you are Jamal's manager, you're really going to want to fire him at this point. And I get it. I completely understand that temptation. However, me as a lawyer is going to ask you the following. Because this is performance related, that he needs to be on the ball and give messages to people, I'm going to ask you, what was the expectation of Jamal? And more importantly, does Jamal know what that expectation is? If he doesn't know that he's supposed to be doing this regularly, and you might think, well, he's the receptionist, he should know, he should be handling calls. Yeah, he might. And it might be in his job description, but when was the last time you went over that with him? And have you addressed the fact that he's been making mistakes? If you haven't addressed them, a jury is going to say, well, he should have known that these mistakes were going to lead to him losing his job. He should know what those expectations and that he wasn't meeting those expectations. Did he know that he needed to improve? Has Jamal been given an opportunity to improve? Jurors like to know that an individual who was failing in performance was given an opportunity to make an improvement. And if they aren't given that opportunity, then you look like the big bad Goliath, while Jamal might look like the David here, where it's the little guy and you should have done a better job as the big bad employer. I'm going to ask you, because I'm a lawyer and I hate trees, that what kind of documents do you have? Did you document any of the conversations you had with Jamal? Even if it's a calendar appointment, that talk to Jamal about these client calls, that's going to be enough for me in most cases. I'm certainly going to want more, but I'm going to want to know when you had those conversations with him. And what alternatives to termination are there? Is it possible to give more training and assistance and mentoring to Jamal, or is it possible to move him to a different team? Is it possible to have him get a final written performance improvement plan of some sort? And then I'm going to ask you questions that identify risk from a legal perspective. I'm going to ask if Jamal has used leave anytime soon. Has he complained about any discrimination, harassment, or safety issues? Has he complained about his manager? And what is his relationship with you as the manager like? If there's already a contentious relationship, I'm going to be concerned that Jamal, and this termination comes out of the blue, I'm going to be concerned that Jamal is going to think it has something to do with maybe his protected class status or your hatred of him, and not just that he wasn't performing well. So I'm going to ask you all these questions. My clients already know that I'm going to ask all these questions, so usually they come a little bit prepared, but these questions are designed for us to figure out what the risks are. Now, if a manager came to me and said, we need to terminate Jamal, I'm going to say yes, because remember, my philosophy of HR is usually we can say yes, but I am going to think of other considerations that we might do that either keeps Jamal in position or at least reduces our risk from a litigation standpoint, meaning, are we going to give Jamal a severance agreement? Even if it's a modest amount that gets us the release, that's what I'm going to be looking for. So the other part of being a manager is that you need to recognize some legal issues. We want your ears and your eyes to be open to different situations that those laws are going to impose on you. So I've given you 8 different sentences that trigger various different laws. The first is, I'm really depressed and stressed out. This could be an indication of a need for leave or an accommodation, or a need for a more flexible schedule so the individual can get some healthy sleep. I know all of us do not function well with no sleep, and so if we can help, we should help. The next is, I can't drive for 6 weeks. This could be an indication of an individual who has gotten into some legal trouble, whether it's a driving under the influence, or more likely to me, getting way too many speeding tickets. Or it could be, I can't drive for the next 6 weeks because I am taking new medication that doesn't allow me to. So when you hear a statement like this, this is going to raise a bunch of different legal issues. Then I need to keep my leg elevated. This could be an indication of a work-related accident or a more accommodation that's needed for a disability, even if it's temporary. I'm not feeling well and haven't been for the past few weeks. This in a particular case was enough to trigger the need to go through the interactive process under the ADA, which means where the employer and the employee's health provider needs to exchange information to see if an accommodation is required. Jim makes me feel uneasy. This is certainly something that would trigger for me that there's potentially a harassment issue going on, or something is an interpersonal relationship that I'm going to be concerned about. And so as a manager, I'm hoping that you would come to me or a member of HR to talk about, Susie's feeling uneasy around Jim. Then, or I'm feeling a little isolated. Is this about something that you have reported, whether it's illegal conduct, harassment, discrimination? Is it something, what is the reasons for you feeling isolated? Can I give you more assistance? I'm going to hope that managers are going to be asking that kind of question. My dad has been really sick. This might be need something about the FMLA or leave and sick time. And the ultimate, I'm having a baby. Okay. Pro tip, managers, if somebody comes and tells you that they're having a baby, the first word out of your mouth should be congratulations, okay? But the next thing you should be thinking about is, okay, how is this going to impact the work, and do you need a leave? What are your plans? Have you thought about that? Have you looked at our employee policies around leave and parenting leave? Okay, I don't expect you to write all that down, but I do hope the first thing that you tell an employee when they tell you that they're pregnant or that they're going to be having a baby, their wife or they're sniffing others having a baby, the first thing you say is congratulations, okay? It'll go far in management if that's the first thing you say, okay? In any one of these situations, if any of those sentences are uttered to you or sentences like them come to you, the first thing, besides saying congratulations, I hope you know that you can go to Human Resources. Human Resources is there to partner with you. And if you think one of these issues could be something that could trigger one of the laws that we talked about briefly, HR is a great place to go. HR is designed to be your partner and to help you. You are not alone as a manager. And I think too often managers feel like they're out there in the middle of the ocean and they're expected to swim. Well, HR has both life vests and dinghies. And so we're hoping that you can come in and help, and we can help you do better with these kinds of situations. So if you think you want to go to HR, that's the answer right there in that question, is you should go to HR. So let's do one of my favorite examples. I use this example in nearly every one of my harassment trainings because it cuts both ways. It's both one that's very close to whether or not this could be harassment, but it also shows a good example of the interpersonal relationships between employees that could cause issues. You've got two employees who don't normally work together, but they're working an event together, and the event takes forever, and so they go to the bar for happy hour afterwards. Things get a little flirty, and they start following each other on social media. And Lisl makes some flirty posts, and she tags DuWayne in them. DuWayne might not respond to the actual post, but Susie comes to you as a manager and says, "Hey, did you see these posts? Aren't they a little racy?" Now, in my examples, when I'm doing harassment training, I ask participants to be a Lisl and DuWayne, and they can play it however they want. But their questions come up with, well, is this harassment? And I'm going to tell you, guess what, manager? You don't have to know that. You can go to HR, and HR will help you figure this out. The next is, well, what do we do about Susie? Susie's the complainer. She's the problem here. But if we deal with Susie, there's potential that we could walk into a retaliation complaint. So if you went to HR, they tell you that and help you guide with how to deal with Susie. And then HR can help handle the issues between Lisl and DuWayne. So this is an example of something where we're in social media, which is essentially a 24/7 after work happy hour. And because we know that activities that happen at happy hour could affect the workplace, then we know we need to deal with them. So we might have to deal with things on social media. Since last August and the incidents surrounding Charlottesville, I've helped my clients fire 5 individuals for racist posts on social media. And each one of those terminations, the employer had to do some big self-reflection. And 3 of them, it involved management. So we had to go back through the last group of hiring that those managers did to make sure that their apparent bias did not interfere with the hiring process. Those are hard things to deal with. So even as a manager, if something like this happens, whether it's Lisl and DuWayne, or if you hear about something that was posted on social media, and it could affect the workplace, HR is the place to go. One other key point for managers, there is no such thing as an unofficial complaint. If you hear a rumor, a whiff, you get the sense that there's going to be a problem, you bind the company back to those laws that we talked about earlier. And because your knowledge places the organization on the hook, you need to do something about it. And most often that is talking to one of your managers or talking to HR. You're on the hook, period, okay? So what can we do? We talked a little bit about setting those expectations, which is an achievement piece. We've talked a little bit about holding employees accountable for those expectations. And the last piece is called accessibility, which means that you as a manager need to be open and available to employees so that they can ask you questions about their job and about their careers. These 3 things are your responsibility. It's your job to know about the achievement, the accountability, and making yourself accessible to your employees. So here we go. Here are my 2 questions. The first one is, how is it going? This seems like a really easy question. And if you're in the Midwest, how's it going? Usually responds with fine. But I'm going to ask you as a manager to genuinely ask, how is it going? You want to solicit information from your employees. What you're going to get is you're going to get those roadblocks that are hampering their ability to do their job. You're going to find out about performance issues, and you're going to find out about things that are going really well. You might also find out about things that are affected by laws, whether it's my dad is sick, I'm having a baby, all of those things. Those are issues that may come up when you ask this question. The other bonus about asking this question is you build trust with your employees. If you're genuinely interested in how things are going and you want to hear their input, employees are going to share that information with you. I promise. So please ask, how's it going? Genuinely asking gets you all of this information. You find about possible leave issues, possible disability and worker comp issues, and most importantly, those harassment issues. While I don't necessarily want you to know about all of their issues in their personal life, how's it going coming from a manager implies that you're asking about things that could affect their work, and that is important. You want to solicit that information. The second question, is there anything I can do? This is to remove roadblocks and advocate on behalf of employees. If I can get information from employees about maybe we should change a particular process, maybe we can help with interpersonal problems between departments where I can go in and advocate for you, just like we did in that Julie scenario earlier on in the webinar. Those kinds of issues help us do our job as a manager. So remove those roadblocks and advocate for employees, both our folks inside and outside of our workplace, because we get that information when we ask if there's anything we can do for you. Managers overall really need to get the time and the resources to be able to have conversations with employees and genuinely get information from them, and not just be rushed with the flutter of all the paperwork we have to get through and all of the compliancy issues that we have to get through and actually getting the work done. If we could take a breath and ask these two questions, we'll be significantly better managers, I promise. Genuinely asking and taking action builds the trust that we need employees to have with us. And when our employees trust us and to share the problems that they're having, we can then trust them to get their work done. And that mutual trust benefits the organization overall. And please sometimes consider the poor little employment lawyers in your life. Keep notes. The one thing I love about taking notes is, particularly if you're using email, contrary to the November 2016 election, email is incredibly hard to destroy. So I can usually find it in a sent box or an email inbox, and it's always date and time stamped. I know when the conversations happen. So if you're having an employee with a problem, let's say it's Abed who doesn't understand what his job is, if you send an email to yourself after the conversation, I know when the conversation occurred, I know what the conversation involved, and I can then show a jury, see, look at, we had a conversation about Abed's work performance. When you're doing these notes, make sure that you're sticking to facts and not opinions, that you're keeping out protected class information or the use of leave or other kinds of complaints, and you stick with the actual performance measures and the misconduct that is at issue. Again, this is really, really important. 91% of jurors trust managers over, or trust paper over managers. So if you have documented in some form, they know that when you're testifying about it later on, that this is in-time documentation which supports you. It's really, really important. If you go up on the witness stand with no paper to support you, jurors may assume that you are just towing the company line, and that's not what we want. We want to have credible witnesses, and credibility is underscored by paper. And so let's kill some more trees, people. Kill some more trees. So my takeaways for you are this. Managing is really hard. We get that it's really hard, and I wish we could give you the time and the resources to really do it well. You are responsible for the achievement and the accountability of your folks, and we're also responsible for being available to them to be able, so that they can come to you with questions and concerns. You can build trust by asking the two questions that we talked about. How's it going? And is there anything I can do to help? And that gives you information to remove the roadblocks that your people are having, and then advocate for, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with that word at this point, for your people. If you can advocate for your people, they're gonna trust you more and know that you have their back. You're not just throwing them under the bus, which is one of the worst cliches in employment these days, but I see it everywhere. And finally, as a manager, you have a lot of allies in your organization. You have your own managers that are there to help you remove the roadblocks, which might be helping you navigate through a people problem that you are having. And you also have your human resources folks who are there to help to make sure that things are held consistently throughout the organization, and that you can help spitball ideas about how should we handle this. Is this a performance issue? Is this a discipline issue? What should a performance improvement plan look like? Or how do I deal with a problem employee? HR folks are particularly skilled and trained, and we can't ever make this stuff up. We hear some of the weirdest stories because employees are creative. Sometimes they're not always the brightest bulbs, and so we get to see a lot of different things. And if you're a new manager, use us. We really, really do want you to use us. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the GoToWebinar now, or here is all of my contact information. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find my website, which is just thrivelawconsulting.com. Or you can reach me on the Twitters. I love the Twitters. I use them quite a bit. And so I'm happy to answer your questions, or even if you have concerns or anything like that, feel free to tweet at me as well.
Yeah, and I'd second that. Kate's a great follow on Twitter. I think that's probably the first time we got connected was over social media. And again, if you have some questions here in the final minutes of the webinar, feel free to type them in. Just one quick question. Actually, we have a note from Steve. Any additional notes for those of us who manage people offshore?
So I've dealt with having employees in multiple different countries, and what I have found is that the most important piece is that employees feel that there is some sort of sense of fairness, that you're giving them an opportunity to improve, and that generally, or give them an opportunity to voice their opinion about the actions that's happening. So I look for what the laws are from the countries that I'm dealing with, and then also try to build in that sense of fairness of what were the expectations, did you know about them, or if it's misconduct, hold them to that misconduct, say this is why we can't do this. So yeah.
How do you, Hillary asked, how do you determine what a reasonable opportunity to improve is?
That's really going to depend on the individual circumstances. For the time span for a reasonable opportunity to improve can be as short as a week, depending on what the performance issue is. I would really encourage people to go at least 2 weeks, if not 30 days, because we can't really measure see if there's improvement. If you're only using a performance improvement to set the employee up and make it unreasonable for them, they're going to know that you're just trying to set them up to fail. And so I want to be open with them, saying here is the real amount of time that we want to give you, and here's what I'm going to do in the meantime in this period to help you actually improve. So I generally encourage 30 days, but that's not always necessary. If the performance issue is really causing harm to the business, it may be that we just are going to have to let you go if it's causing significant harm. But I really am going to encourage you to give some time for that time to improve.
And a few people have asked if the recording will be available. Yes, we will send the recording link to everyone who's registered, so you'll be able to review the slides again and also Kate's information. One final question from Charles. What do I do if my boss, a director, doesn't support me as a manager because they are a weak director?
Oh, this is a struggle, Charles. I apologize if this is happening to you. One thing I would do is I would go, because remember, employees do two things, or HR does two things. It helps management and also it can help employees. And so if you like and trust your HR folks, I would go to them for tips on how to deal with your particular manager, or how to set up time with, skip levels, where you're going to skip your director and talk to his or her boss. And so, trying to find those kinds of avenues and resources. HR is usually a good one, and then your manager's manager might also be a good one. You just want to say, hey, can we get some coffee sometime? I just kind of want to see what your vision for my team might be. And then during that conversation, you can ask them, well, here's how I'm dealing with these concerns or these issues or even these expectations that are placed on me. Is this how you see I should do it? And being proactive with that particular person can help then build credibility with them, and then better position you to have a better mentor, a better supervisor. And you don't want to, throw your weak director under a bus, but you do want to seek out the kind of assistance as a manager that you can get. And so I'd recommend you try something like that.
Kate, thank you so much for being here today. This has generated even a lot of good thoughts for me in a management role as well, and hopefully it was definitely of interest to the audience. So again, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise today.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Go Gophers.
All right, go Gophers. We need that. All right. And again, thank you to all who joined us. We have some great webinars coming up in October. Check those out on our website. Thanks again to one of our webinar supporting sponsors, Liberty Mutual Insurance. And in closing, thank you to the members of the University of Minnesota Alumni Association who make initiatives like this webinar series possible. We appreciate all that you do to make our global community of alumni and students ignite success. And if you're interested in being a member, visit umnalumni.org/membership. That concludes today's webinars. Go Gophers. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you in October.